the cop, the killer, and a love triangle that started in jail. Angela Parks had a bright future. Graduated from the Riverside County Police Academy in Los Angeles. She worked as an assistant to the county sheriff and had a secure job as a corrections officer at the county jail, where she was highly praised by all of her colleagues. For some time now, Angela had been engaged to Johnnie Porchè, a respected police officer who loved her very much. Johnny's entire family adored Angela, just a warm, brilliant, and cheerful person, and she was welcomed as part of their family. Everything seemed to indicate that Angela Parks was the perfect woman, someone you'd want to have in your family. But some people knew that Angela was hiding a long list of secrets that would forever change her life and the lives of those around her. Secrets that involved her fiancé, a murder investigation, and a dangerous figure in Southern California's criminal underworld. A man who would appear in her life to destroy everything she had spent so much time and effort building. But the twist is that Angela was a willing participant. Ride with us as we reveal the level of betrayal. And hit that like and subscribe button for more riveting stories from C.R.U.S.H Unit. Johnnie Porchè. Johnnie Porchè was a lucky man. A native of Riverside, California, Johnnie spent his early years without a father figure to look up to. During his childhood, Johnnie lived with his mother Janine and his sister Jana. This all changed when his mother met Ron, a respected homicide detective who soon became the protective figure and moral beacon the family so desperately needed, impressing not only Janine, but also her two kids. To Johnnie, Ron was bigger than life. A towering man at 6'4" and in great physical shape, Ron would become a major influence in Johnnie's life. Setting a good example as a stepfather and police officer, Ron influenced and inspired Johnnie to enlist in the Army, and he did, naturally continuing on to serve as an officer in Riverside PD. The perfect angel, Angela Parks. Johnnie loved being a cop in Riverside. It was his dream job. His mother worked as a photographer for the department, and his stepfather Ron worked in homicide after all. So it was no surprise that Johnnie was smitten with Angela Parks, a bright and charming young woman he met at a party after being introduced by a friend's girlfriend, who went through the police academy with Angela. But Angela captivated Johnnie with more than just her interest in becoming a police officer. Angela was a magnetic woman and was very outgoing. Just a warm personality who always made sure that everyone around her felt comfortable. What neither Johnnie and his family didn't fully grasp was that this young woman had a dark and potentially troubled past. The daughter of a decorated U.S. Army sergeant and a South Korean mother, Angela Parks was forced to grow up fast. Not much is known about Angela's mother, but she and Angela's father divorced when Angela was 15 years old. Her mother moved back to Korea and disappeared from her daughter and ex-husband's lives. Everyone can agree that adolescence is a vulnerable time in a young person's life. So this already difficult phase worsened when Angela's father was diagnosed with severe pancreatic cancer. Angela took on the task of caring for her father, and they were always close. He passed away just 6 months after his diagnosis. In less than a year, Angela's life changed from that of a typical teenager to that of an orphan who had to leave school and start working. Sometime later, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, Pablo. However, Angela did not let this situation destroy her future. She managed to put her life in order, studying at the Riverside Police Academy, where she excelled thanks to her dedication and intelligence. After graduation, she was assigned as an assistant to Sheriff Keith Yukimura and worked for a considerable time at the county jail. Once again, she stood out, both for her wit and charming personality. She easily won over anyone in her orbit. No one would guess that Angela's downfall would begin at this very jail, her stepping stone to what should have been a successful law enforcement career. George Anthony Hernandez Jr. George Hernandez was a dangerous man. He had the 1,000-yard stare. If he mad dogs you, you can see in his eyes the years of street combat, and chances are you won't want that smoke. On paper, however, it wasn't made obvious that he was a powerful figure in the criminal underworld. Hernandez didn't have a dark and troubled childhood. He went to a good school, was a smart student, and grew up in a home far from the stereotypical broken and dysfunctional home from which a lot of gangsters emerge. As he entered adolescence, something changed, and he became a different person. He joined his neighborhood gang, Arlanza 13, a set that originated in the Latino community of the same name. During his youth, Hernandez took on the task of building an impressive criminal record filled with robberies, shootings, and multiple charges of violence. The most significant of these, and the one that would eventually bring George Hernandez, Angela Parks, and Johnnie Porchè together, occurred on July 26, 2004. Hernandez, allegedly acting on orders from his superiors in the Mexican Mafia, murdered a man named George Ortiz with 5 shots to the head. Ortiz had been acting as a confidential informant, giving the police information on the operations of Arlanza 13, but he was eventually caught, resulting in Ortiz getting the green light. Hernandez had no problem carrying out the mission, assassinating Ortiz outside a bar in the early morning hours. The murder did not go unnoticed. Witnesses saw both the incident and George Hernandez's Chevy Malibu leaving the scene, but not him. Hernandez was only confirmed to be inside a nearby bar. Still, the police tracked him down and arrested him. A search of his belongings revealed 2 9mm and a QP of meth. A bullet recovered from the victim's head matched one of the guns found in Hernandez's possession. This was far from the last time Hernandez would cause trouble. Hernandez showed cunning and intelligence by refusing to talk, demanding a lawyer. But the evidence against him was strong, and so he was charged with murder. A therapeutic relationship. Angela was the rock in Johnny's life when he needed her the most. One tragic Sunday, while on patrol, Johnnie Porchè received a call from the department instructing him to go and stop a man who had just stabbed another person. Johnny responded to the call, and the situation got a little out of hand. Upon arriving at a driveway, Johnny encountered a man wearing no shirt and armed with 2 bloody knives. He was confrontational and wouldn't back down. Johnny watched as he took a knife and cut his own face with it. He tried to stop the suspect, but after the man refused to drop the knives and lunged at him, Johnny opened fire 5 times. Rounds from a .40 caliber handgun hit him in the head, but it still did not incapacitate him. The man still tried to attack again, but Johnny was able to finally subdue him, and then he died. At that moment, Johnny was startled by a house's front door opening. At the doorway was the man's 3-year-old son, who saw the whole thing. Ultimately, the use of deadly force was deemed self-defense, but killing a man in front of his kid haunted Johnny, who began to go through a severe psychological crisis. He drank heavily and sometimes hallucinated that the man he killed was in his backyard. His PTSD was calmed by Angela, a woman who would soon become his fiancée, helping Johnny heal from his pain. Angela quickly became a part of Johnny's family. Johnny found solace and support in her during his crisis and fell deeply in love with her. This feeling extended to all members of the family. Johnny's sister Jana soon began to see Angela as her own sister, and when Jana decided to get married, she didn't hesitate to ask Angela to be a part of her wedding. Johnny's parents were no different. Impressed by Angela's affectionate and loving nature, they began to think of her as someone they would be proud to call their daughter-in-law. Angela spent a lot of time with Johnny's family. They even had a weekly ritual of watching movies at home together, which tells you the level of comfort they all shared. Angela was a fixture around the house, so no one was surprised when Johnny asked her to marry him. The news was received with great joy in the family, but just a month after the engagement, things began to change. The growing distance. The first strange episode occurred soon after the engagement, when Angela, who regularly visited Johnny and his family, started to distance herself more and more. The couple bought a piece of land where they planned to build a house to live in after they got married. And right there on the dirt lot is where Johnny proposed. But just a few weeks later, Johnny couldn't help but notice that his fiancée didn't share his enthusiasm for their future together. Whenever Johnny suggested they go see the house, she would make all kinds of excuses as if it was an inconvenience. Another strange sign was Angela's lack of interest in her son Pablo. Although she knew she was getting married soon, Angela never showed much interest in letting her child meet the new family he was becoming a part of. The boy lived with his father's family in Orange County, about 50 miles away, and according to Johnny, Angela would go weeks, even months without visiting her son. This situation seemed odd to say the least, given that Angela was financially stable enough to have her son by her side. But she never saw him. The mysterious Sandra Lopez. Meanwhile, the George Hernandez murder investigation continued. Investigators at the Robert Presley Detention Center soon discovered, after reviewing the inmate's mail, that Hernandez was communicating directly with high-ranking members of the Mexican Mafia, proving that he was not just any thug and that he had more power than they had imagined. With this information in hand, Detective Steve Shumway, the man in charge of the investigation into Hernandez, went a step further and began listening to his phone calls, closely observing the visits he received and keeping detailed records of everything. Shumway discovered that George Hernandez was still a shot caller from his cell. The detective found one phone number that caught his attention. It belonged to a woman named Sandra Lopez. Shumway couldn't help but notice that Sandra, who was the mother of a child about 4 years old, seemed strikingly different from the other women Hernandez communicated with. And although he spoke to her only once, and only by phone, the detective sensed that he was talking to an intelligent and reasonable woman, though something didn't add up. Shumway just couldn't put his finger on it. Concerned about the child's future, the detective contacted Sandra directly, warning her that George Hernandez was a very dangerous individual and that he was under investigation for murder, and that sooner or later he'd ask her to do something that would get her in trouble. He stressed that the best thing she could do was to avoid any further contact with him. Sandra said she was not interested in getting into trouble and acted as if she would follow the detective's advice. Unfortunately, things wouldn't work out that way. Angela, the fallen angel. Meanwhile, Angela Parks began to change in more extreme ways. So much so that 2 months after the engagement, she was unrecognizable. Not only did she stop visiting Johnny and his family, the way she dressed and groomed changed from that of a demure and sweet girl to one more akin to a juvenile delinquent. She wore revealing clothes, lost a lot of weight, and as if that weren't enough, other strange things began to happen. Angela began to show little enthusiasm for Johnny popping by her job. Since both of them were law enforcement officers, it wasn't out of the ordinary for Johnny to drop by. Most people would be elated if their sweetheart visited them at work. Not Angela. Late one night, Johnny drove by the jail when Angela was on duty. To his surprise, he noticed that there were no cars around the building. None except Angela's car, which had its window half open at 1 in the morning. Riverside might be a pretty safe area, but no one would leave their car window open there. This ain't the 1950s. Ron and Janine, Johnny's parents, also had a weird random encounter. One day on their way to a restaurant, they saw Angela talking to a group of people. Angela's clothes were different, and the way she was interacting with them was out of whack. And then there were the people she was seen with. Ron and Janine's alarm bells went off. Being in law enforcement, they could tell they were Sureño gang members. The body language, baggy clothes, blue Nike Cortez, tattoos, and specifically the type of tattoos made it obvious. Caught by surprise by the sudden run-in, Angela quickly said goodbye to these people and joined her future in-laws, stammering to make excuses. She said they're old friends from school, but was not very convincing. The final stretch. By this time, Johnny was beginning to suspect that he wasn't the only man in his fiancée's life. They hadn't been intimate in months. Angela was growing increasingly distant, and although Johnny tried to win back her affection, it seemed as if she was determined to respond negatively to his attempts to rekindle their relationship. At his wit's end, and as a last resort, Johnny planned a weekend trip to Palm Springs. During the trip, he again noticed unusual behavior. Angela was not wearing her engagement ring, and she kept going into the bathroom with a cell phone. One night, she started crying and kept saying, "I don't want this. I don't want this." And then the day came. A sad March 15th, 2005. Johnnie Porchè was celebrating his birthday, and what started out as the perfect day turned into a nightmare. That morning, Angela Parks returned from work, and for the first time in weeks, Johnny felt like the thoughtful, loving woman he's in love with was back. Angela told him she was going to get her nails done with a friend and would be taking one of their 3 vehicles, a Honda Accord that was hers. Johnny had plans to wash the Accord that day, so he asked Angela to take another car. Angela did not seem too happy about the idea, to say the least. Johnny, puzzled by this refusal, now insisted she take another car, and Angela finally relented and took the truck instead. While Angela was on the way to the nail salon, Johnny was driving to the car wash. He stopped and started to look through her car, and that's when he found the letters. The prison love letters. At first, Johnny was worried about Angela. These handwritten letters talked about her murder in detail. It was strange that Angela kept these. They were potential evidence into a capital murder case. Leafing through the pages was enough to know that it was best to turn them in as soon as possible. But when Johnny stopped to really read them, he felt like someone punched him in the gut. Not only did the letters mention murder, but in more than one paragraph it was stated in an almost urgent tone that some people needed to be taken care of. It said, quote, "These people need to take a dirt nap," unquote. Coming from a murder defendant, it was quite literally an order to kill. The tone of the letters was not imperative and authoritative, like that of a supervisor giving an order to a subordinate. The tone was intimate, affectionate, and even romantic. Johnny quickly put 2 and 2 together. These letters were messages to an accomplice that was romantically tied to a murderer who wanted witnesses killed, and they were in Angela's possession. The letters had addresses and names of people Johnnie did not know. His stepfather, however, knew who they were. Ron has interviewed them as a detective during the investigation of the George Ortiz murder, the same man who was allegedly shot and killed by George Hernandez months earlier. In a hasty attempt to find out what was going on, Ron and Johnnie called Detective Steve Shumway, the detective in charge of the Hernandez-Ortiz investigation, and got him up to speed. The detective remembered that Hernandez had been calling a certain phone number regularly. Curious, Shumway asked for Angela's cell phone number, and before Johnnie finished giving the number, Shumway finished his sentence. The number was Angela's. Johnnie's heart sank. The frequent trips to the bathroom in Palm Springs made sense now. Sandra Lopez, the woman Detective Shumway talked to on the phone, was Angela Parks. Angela's distance, her change in attitude and clothing, the anomalies, the veil has been lifted. As Johnnie had begun to suspect, Angela was unfaithful, but not with another officer or civilian. She was involved with a felon, George Anthony Hernandez Jr. A tragic end. Things just kept getting worse. The situation was surreal. For a respected police officer and trusted personal assistant to the county sheriff to collude with a killer to eliminate two innocent people was unheard of. Orders were immediately issued to search Angela Parks' apartment, locker, and belongings, as well as George Hernandez's cell. What they found only confirmed their suspicions. In his jail cell, Hernandez had numerous portraits of Angela. But the most striking of all was a photograph, the photo of a child, a boy about 8 or 9 years old. Ron, who went with Steve to inspect everything in the cell, had no trouble identifying the boy. It was Pablo, Angela's son. During the interrogations, Angela seemed distant and somewhat sarcastic, as if she didn't understand or comprehend the seriousness of her situation. It was as if she believed it was all a misunderstanding that she could easily shake off. She claimed that her affair with George Hernandez, whom she called Tony, was nothing more than a game, a fantasy, that she knew it wouldn't go anywhere, that she was very clear that Hernandez would never get out of prison, and that what she really wanted was to be with Johnnie and have a family. Angela may have said those words in a desperate attempt to get out of trouble, or she may have said them sincerely, with her true desire being with Johnnie in their new life as a married couple. Either way, the words fell on deaf ears. Angela was immediately arrested, and at that moment, her mask of detachment and indifference crumbled. That same day, 32-year-old Angela Carol Parks was arrested at the same jail where she had worked that morning, and after her trial, was sentenced to 19 years in prison for conspiracy to murder in collusion with George Anthony Hernandez. She is housed at the California Institute for Women Prison. Meanwhile, Hernandez was sentenced to death, serving his time in San Quentin. He has since appealed the verdict. In the meantime, both Johnnie Porchè and his family had to move on, finding the best way to deal with the pain that such a betrayal brought on. The discovery changed their lives. Johnnie was able to pick up the pieces. Today, he is happily married, a father of 3, and the owner of a successful private security firm. Despite the tragedy and betrayal, Johnnie Porchè came out on top. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for more content from C.R.U.S.H Unit. And if you want to watch another story of a dangerous double life, click here.